Welcome everybody. My name is Maeve Gilchrist. They've said a little bit about who I am, but it's a real honor to be here with the World Music Institute, Gabby and Bryce, to interview my dear friend and a musician whom I admire very much, Kaoru Watanabe. I've known Kaoru for a number of years now. I was going to say first of all through the Silkroad ensemble, with which we're both members. But is that true, Caro, or did I first meet you through mutual friends in Brooklyn Rider, the string quartet, and then do some performance of your music with you?
I think we met through Hadi. Hadi
Oh, yes, yes.
doing an event, and you came over to my studio to rehearse. I think.
That's right.
So
Yes. And
early.
I remember this meeting very well. I remember it because of all the huge taiko drums in the room. And I hope you don't mind me saying this live on the internet, but I remember it very clearly because you had just met your wonderful partner, Yurie, and were so in love. I've never met a man so in love. But we're not here to talk about that, although I think it's perhaps not disconnected. We're here to talk about you as a musician, as an improviser, as a composer. And it's funny, we come from such different backgrounds. I'm from Edinburgh, Scotland. My mother's Irish. You grew up in America to Japanese parents. Have deeply, rooted yourself within the Japanese traditional arts. But in a way, I feel very much of a kindred spirit. And we'll get to that later because I'd love to talk about this idea of being a traditional musician and a maker of new music, and um, both the challenges and the beauty with which uh, that can create. But I'd love to kind of start at the beginning of your life, Kaoru, and please jump in or guide me in any way as we move. You were born in St. Louis, Missouri, and your parents were both classical musicians with the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. I'd love to, instead of asking you biographically about your early years, I'd love to hone in on the idea of music in the home and the sounds that you grew up with. Can you talk a little bit about the sounds of childhood?
Beautiful. I was not expecting that. First of all, great to see you, and thanks, Bryce, Gabby, and World Music Institute for having me. Um, yeah, growing up, I think like most kids, I wasn't particularly into Western classical music, but that's both of my parents were, as you said, in the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra. Um, my dad is a violinist, my mom's a harpist. So they were practicing all the time. I remember being annoyed that I would hear my dad practicing sometimes at night when I was trying to go to sleep. Um, and my mother, I remember, if I'm thinking of my earliest memories of her playing the harp, was coming to my preschool and playing for the kids. And she would do this piece. Oh wow, I should have done a little research. I forget the composer, but there's a piece where at one point she's playing and she starts knocking on the body of the harp. And for me, that was like the most exciting thing, that she would hit the body of the harp like a drum. Um, so yeah, I guess I always had it. My dad, uh, in my memory, my dad forced me to start playing violin at a very early age. Um, so it wasn't, I mean, I don't know if this is supposed to be about me, but you and I have talked a lot about growing up playing music and music in the house and what that meant to us. For me, it wasn't this joyful thing where we would all commune and play music together, but it was like my dad saying, practice, practice, and me not wanting to, and constantly getting in fights with him. And my mom she never really pushed the harp on me at all. I would just kind of sneak into her studio and kind of pluck a little bit every now and then and play with the pedals. But it wasn't something that I found like a passion for or anything at an early age.
And so, if you kind of resisted that push to be practicing, what was it that eventually brought you as a youngster to playing music?
Um, I started with violin. It didn't last very long. I didn't get very serious about it. And I didn't play for many years. At one point, my parents were encouraging me like to play something, anything. Um, and then a neighbor had a flute, a Western, soprano metal flute that they weren't using. And someone it just kind of came up like, you want to try this? I said, sure. I had no, it wasn't, again, it wasn't a thing of me. I saw a flute performance and was moved and wanted to play, but it was something that kind of fell into my lap. So I started playing it, middle school, band, high school orchestra, nothing very, I wasn't bad, but I wasn't special either. I was decent, a pretty decent mid to high high school flute player. Um, but I did have a wonderful teacher who was a member of the St. Louis Symphony as well, Jan Smith, and she asked me at one point if I wanted to study jazz. And I had no idea what jazz was, but I said sure. It sounded something. It was not what my parents were. So, um, her boyfriend at the time, I think, was playing jazz, so he would come down after my classical lesson. He would play bass and have me improvise a bit. Didn't know the rules or anything or what I was doing really. Um, and it wasn't until I went to Interlochen Arts Academy that I decided to go really invest fully into playing jazz. That was my senior year of high school, so I left um, to a boarding arts high school. Um, and then from there, because I was surrounded by other musicians my age who are extremely passionate about music, that's when my view started shifting from Western classical music to jazz. And then that led me to the Manhattan School of Music. And that is kind of where things really started to change for me in my approach to music.
We were talking a little bit before we went live about your life in chapters, and uh, there's three incredibly contrasting chapters of your early life. There's your life in St. Missouri, as you're describing it. There's you moving to New York to study Black American jazz at the Manhattan School of Music, which sounds like it lit you up in a way. And then there's this next chapter, which was when you moved you got interested in Japanese culture. You moved to Japan to Sado. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Trained with, joined, and eventually started to lead the renowned taiko group KODO. Now, many people I feel like are interested in a superficial way, or perhaps not a superficial way, in their heritage. Many artists are inspired to explore their heritage as a way to evolve as an artist, but the level to which you committed to going to Japan, to learning the language, to living this hugely different life that was demanding mentally, physically. It was a huge demand on your time. What made you do that? Like in a deep way, like what made you commit to it that hard? Because from what I'm hearing so far, it's not like you were please don't take this the wrong way, intensely focused, as you know, like a kid. And I know you, and actually one of the most wonderful things about you is, as well as being this incredible musician and composer and in-depth artistic thinker, you're also like really fun and a great hang to go and have a beer with. And if I didn't know you had done this incredibly focused niche thing, I don't think I would have pinned it on you. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, where do I start? About the drinking or about the? I think in terms of just trying to go as deep as possible into this music, um, I I kind of started going to a little bit when I talked about going to Manhattan School of Music. Um, Up until then, as I was talking about classical music, music was something that my parents were kind of forcing me to play, and I didn't really feel this passionate, personal kind of connection to. Um, and then it was going to Manhattan School of Music as trying to study jazz and getting into John Miles Davis and Duke Ellington and trying to understand that history and that legacy. Um, and then I was classmates with people like Jason Moran and Stefan Harris and Eric Harland and people who are now kind of at the top tier of in the jazz world. Um, Hearing them and spending time with them and realizing that for them jazz wasn't just learning scales and rhythms and chord changes, but it was really part of their culture and heritage and a source of pride and a source of a way to connect with their ancestors and their deeper connection to their um, yeah, just like the lineage of who they were. Um, and for me, because I didn't speak Japanese, I didn't, as you mentioned, I didn't know about traditional Japanese music. I felt that looking at them, maybe was there a place where I had that connection to music, which was, something that went deeper than just something that I enjoyed or that I was passionate about, but actually I felt I had some sort of spiritual or, through my DNA or something. And I didn't know, but I did know, intuited that I had to go to Japan to even search for that or to realize or to figure out if I had any sort of connection there. I saw the group KODO at Carnegie Hall one in my fourth year, my senior year of college, and watching them perform, I thought to myself, oh, this is going to unlock some mysteries for me. There's going to be some answers to these questions that I had, um, and it did. And so as you said, I moved to Sado Island.
Can
Um,
I just, can we hone in right there? You
hmm.
saw the group playing at Carnegie Hall and you said it unleashed or it answered some questions you had. And what do you mean by that?
Actually, what I said was if I would understand what they were doing, that would answer some questions. I didn't, it
And
wasn't
I,
answering questions at the time.
okay, okay, okay,
So they
okay.
came out on stage. I don't know if you've ever seen KODO, but for those of you who haven't, they wear traditional Japanese garb. They're playing these huge, oftentimes huge 500-pound drums. Um, and even the way they walk on stage, they have a very almost a ceremonious, very slow way of walking sometimes. And they don't just start playing, but they kind of sit for a moment and then slowly prepare their sticks, and there's a whole kind of ritualistic aspect to the performance. Um, which I was, what does that mean? Like, why are they walking so slowly? Why are they taking so much time to play? And then once they started playing, it's like this super intense ferocity, like just the physical intensity of how they play. And then they would finish and then very calmly kind of stand and turn and leave the stage. All these like these things and like what are they wearing and what they're singing songs. I didn't know what the songs were about. I didn't know what anything meant, right? Um, but there was also something familiar about it to me. There's something that resonated very deeply about um yeah, it didn't feel it felt very foreign intellectually, but kind of physically, maybe vibrationally, it didn't feel it felt I felt very connected to it. And that was very mysterious to me. That was very confusing actually. Um, and so I wanted to figure that out. I wanted to understand it intellectually, what was the meaning of the music and this kind of ritual aspect. And then also why did I feel this way when I heard it? Um, and then could I really connect to it at a deeper level? And so that's why I went to Japan.
And
Um,
so you arrive in Japan. You don't speak the language. You're very curious. What are the next steps?
uh, Half a year in Tokyo, living with relatives and teaching English and studying traditional Noh theater, music of Noh theater and other forms of traditional music. I know actually there's a lot of different traditional music that I was studying. Perhaps we were just kind of, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to join KODO, so I went to Japan to with the intent of joining, and I actually got pretty deep into Knoll Theater music. But then I went to audition to become an apprentice with the group. Um, was accepted to be an apprentice, and then from there spent 2 years training. The training includes running at the crack of dawn, running 6 miles a day, growing your own rice, learning many folk dances, drumming styles, different flute, the flutes, different shamisen, different instruments, multiple instruments, tea ceremony, which is this very traditional way of serving tea, and studying Knoll theater again, Kyogen theater, comedic opera form. Was a deep dive into traditional Japanese music and culture. Uh, I was apprenticing with all other people from Japan who had no idea. They had little idea as I did about a lot of these things that we're studying. So living in this old wooden schoolhouse with no heat in the winter, like it was that kind of very Spartan Karate Kid style life of, what are we doing out here in the winter? It's very cold and in the snow and singing, into the cold wind and most traditional music, you study, you kneel, and so having to kneel on a hard wooden floor for hours at a time while singing these ritual songs. Um, yeah, that was a part of the whole 2 year apprenticeship. And whether
And
you're or not, it's like, yeah, just very mind opening in terms of going deep into the tradition.
it also sounds really hard. Were there times you questioned why you were there, or did it feel right? Whatever that means. Like, what kept you there?
Um, I think th- especially in the winters, I would uh, the routine would be wake up at, I think in the winters you wake up around 6 a.m. Your breath is white from how cold it is inside your room. And then you would hear these wooden clappers to wake people up. And the person would walk down the hall, hitting these wooden clappers. I would, throw open before I would wake up, before I would get out of bed, I would think, you know, basically you're in a perpetual state of exhaustion, right? In the winter, you're very cold. But then I would think, okay, back when I was living in New York and I knew other taiko drummers, like I'm living the dream. This is literally the dream. This is like what people are you know, hoping to do someday, and this is where I am. And so yes, like thinking of people who weren't doing it, and then thinking about, you know, uh, yeah, I literally gave myself a pep talk every morning before waking up. Um, and
What
then I
did
would,
your parents think? Like, could you connect with your world back home?
um,
I mean,
we,
what did they think as two Japanese immigrants who played Western classical music who moved to America, and here their son was back in Japan?
yeah, they had just finished paying for 4 years of Manhattan School of Music, and were wondering like, why do you want to move to Japan at this point? Um, and we would talk. This is back when I was still in New York before moving to Japan, and they were they didn't try to dissuade me from going, but they were very curious, like, why are you going? And I remember one point, I saw KODO when I was in college at Carnegie Hall. I did see them when I was 14 or 13 years old in St. Louis, Missouri. My mom took me, and I kind of forgotten about that. It didn't really move me back then. I was 14. I was, whatever, into skateboarding, and it was just an impressive drumming performance. But I didn't understand it. It didn't really resonate. Um, but I remember that moment, and I asked my mom when she was kind of asked, trying to figure out why I was going to Japan. I said, "We went to see KODO together, didn't we?" And she said, "Yeah, yeah, yeah." I said, "How was that for you?" And she said, um, "I couldn't speak for a few days after seeing them perform. It was so just overwhelming, like the physical intensity of it and the emotional, like." She said, I like that's basically all she said. She said I couldn't really speak for a few days. It was just so overwhelming. And then I remember after that, she didn't really question my decision to go after that, after I kind of reminded her of that experience. Um, but then when I was in Japan, back then I would be faxing letters to them. This is before, I mean, email existed, but it wasn't as common, and I was faxing letters. And I remember maybe during my second year as an apprentice, I called home. Um, I would call like once a month or once every 2 months. And we talked, and I talked to my mom, And I remember after 20, 30 minutes, I hung up. And then it was only until after I hung up that I realized that I'd just spoken to my mom all in Japanese.
Mm.
So I think, and I don't think she even really noticed it at the time, but it was something very profound for me that I was speaking to my mother in her native tongue, just having a casual conversation, which again, until I was 22 years old, it wasn't possible. So that was, I think, and then, fast forward a few years, 2 years later, I was playing at Carnegie Hall with KODO, and my mom came to New York to see it. And, so it's like this kind of full cycle thing of, raising these kids in St. Louis. And then now one of the sons is playing at Carnegie Hall, wearing the Japanese garb and playing the Japanese instruments and playing the Japanese flutes, and just a few years after college. So it was it probably as much of a roller coaster ride for them as it was for me. Just like transforming myself as from one thing to another, and yeah, and to this day, I mean, I don't know, I'm jumping around quite a bit now, but my mom is getting up there in age, and she's starting to forget her English. And so we spoke about this not too long ago, but so now I'm able to speak to her in Japanese, and when we speak, and she's able, she can joke about the old days and talk about her childhood in Tokyo, but when she's speaking English, she gets a lot quieter. So I feel really blessed, again, full cycle of like the fact that I spent 10 years in Japan allows me to now speak to my mom, still as she's getting older, and
Yeah.
really still able to connect with her at a really kind of foundational level. So
Mm.
I can't emphasize enough how transformative of a time it was for me to be in Japan and to be with coding.
I've been scribbling keywords that I want to come back to because there's so much there. But I wonder, well, first of all, I just want to say or remind the people out there that we would love to integrate any questions that you have into this conversation. Any and all questions, it will really help us shape the conversation. Um, Also, I need to apologize if you hear wailing in the background. It is my 1 year old. So every now and then I'm muting that and the local train. I live upstate in Kingston. So apologies if you hear a baby crying. I have no control over it. But Kaoru, before we go on with the chat, is this a good time to do some introductions of instruments? You've got an incredible array of percussion instruments aside from the taiko drum. You've got the beautiful shinobue. um, can you chat and perhaps demonstrate to the people watching a couple of these instruments?
Sure. Well, you mentioned percussion instruments, and so I just have it right in front of me on the table here. It's called the atarigane, a metal instrument. Um, and this is the beater. It's called a shumoku, and this white thing is made of deer antler, and the shaft is bamboo. And all Japanese instruments across the board, um, when you're studying any Japanese instrument, you first study the what's called kuchi shoga, which is the singing of the melodies and rhythms, right? And so for this instrument, we have two basic sounds. One is chan. Chan sounds like this. I hit the center of the metal. That's chan. And then you hit the sides, chiki. So chan chiki. So I'm singing chan chiki chi chan chan chiki chiki chi chan 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 chiki chi chan chi chan chan chiki chi chan chi chan. So that would be the process of studying. So right. So that's the chan chiki, for example. Um, and then I have and there's many more. Kagurazusu, for example. Yeah, and I have multiple binzasara, right? It's like a magic show now. I could just have, different
Well,
instruments.
I was going to say, whenever we collaborate, I feel like I don't get an instrument. I don't even just get, or not just, I don't just get Kaoru. I get this sonic world in which I can step into, which I just love. Kaoru, we have someone also. Yes, please carry on.
Okay, so say that again.
No, please carry on. And we have someone asking about the shinobue, the flutes.
Okay, yes, I'll go into the shinobu. So, um, the a flute. Let me think, which is a good one. This instrument is called the shinobue. Uh, Shino is a type of bamboo. Fue is the general word for flute. So this is a certain type of bamboo flute called the shinobue. It's used in traditional music, folk music, and festival music from all over Japan, whether you're in Okinawa or Hokkaido. Each region has their own styles of music. Each village has their own festival, dance accompaniment or accompaniment to like a lion dance or to the carrying of a portable shrine. So when you say Japanese music, traditional Japanese music, it's not one thing. It's literally each village has their own tradition. And so I mentioned kuchi shoga. When you're studying the flutes, they might use different words to emulate the sound of the flutes, depending on which region of Japan you're in, right? But so, for example, for the shinobu, you might learn, if you're studying what's called Edo Matsuri Bayashi, you would learn the phrase chi hyai hyai toro hyo hyu ha. Chi hyai hyai toro to hyu hya. And that would sound like this. Chi hyai hyai toro to hyu hya. Right? So you learn all these songs. You have to learn, you know, many minutes, many, uh, you know, uh, various forms and various structures, and then you would do it all by singing first before playing. Um, yeah, that's the shinobu. It's lacquered on the inside, just a length of bamboo on the outside. Um, I don't know. I can do a whole deep dive in this. I don't know how much time we want to spend on this, but this is called the ryuteki. It's used in gagaku music. It's considered gagaku is considered classical music, not folk music. It's taught in conservatories in Japan. Um, has a very different sound to it. Right? So, um, yeah, and I
So
could,
striking.
yeah.
Um, as a composer, Kaoru, to me as a composer, your compositions I feel reflect you very much as an instrumentalist. Um, there is so many strands to the music that you compose, but the ones that really stick out to me are this kind of linear melodic approach, and then the presence of groove. Which in a way, just seeing you showcase your instruments here, we've got the ethereal linear line of the flute. I can't believe I used the word ethereal. People use it by the harp all the way, and I want to vomit. But there you are. So we've got like the sky and the airiness of the flute, and then this like deep rooted groundedness of the rhythmic engine. As someone who's played your music a lot, it feels to me that a lot of the stuff in between, perhaps harmonic choices and stuff, is less important to you, or you leave it more to the individual harmonic interpretation of the players that you call on. But the melody, this linear movement, and the groove feel very at the front of things. Can you talk a little bit about your compositional process?
Yeah, I love that. I hadn't really broken it down that way before, and it makes a lot of sense. Um, I think spending so much time in Japan, where there, in traditional music, there isn't really a notion of harmony. It is, as you just said, it's linear. Um, it's mentioning gagaku, for example, the type of music I was just performing. Um, and a lot of this, whether it's gagaku, no theater, kabuki theater, there's a lot of music that's out of time. Um, and there's certain elements of Japanese music that is kind of ubiquitous. For example, there's even a word for space and silence, which is ma. And so we talk about ma. We talk about the use of silence and how it's not just a rest, but it's um, a very intentful space between sounds, right? Um, and we talk about notions. There's another phrase that comes up a lot, johakyu, which is the idea of something that starts slow and then there's a break, there's a switch, a shift, and then a fast ending. And this is a very common phrase, johakyu, that we talk about in no theater, in kabuki theater, in gagaku music. Um, and it's very common when you're listening, you'll hear in a play during a dance a slow beginning, a shift, and then a fast ending. And so just pretty unconsciously at this point, I'm not even really thinking about it, but these things are always kind of creeping into the music. Um, the idea of space, the idea of silence, the idea of the idea of stretching time um, is something that I play around with a lot, not all the ways. Um, I think stepping away from jazz 25 years ago, I started thinking less and less about harmony. Um, I'm actually trying to get much more into it as of like maybe a year or two ago. Um, but yeah, you're right. It's kind of the way I'm just so again thinking about also the nature of the instruments. Um, because, for example, the last flute I played, the pitches aren't very accurate. To be there's in traditional gagaku there's microtones, um, but even when you listen to some of the top orchestras, the pitch shifts, and in no theater the pitch will often just kind of jump to where the actor is singing, so it might even be in between pitches, and so my kind of sense of pitch I think has been kind of warped. Um, uh, and then my even my notion when I play the drums, they're not tuned drums, even though they're very resonant. They're not tuned in the sense that I'm not thinking of them in pitches. So when I'm working with a tabla player, for example, with Sandeep, who we work with together, he'll ask me like, "Oh, what keys are your drums in?" I'll say, "I don't. They're not in any keys, but they have a very long tonal resonance to them." So um, all of this affects my composition and how I play and how I improvise. Um,
I also, when I said that, it was very much as a compliment. I like it's one of the many reasons I love collaborating with you is it because it gives me a ton of freedom as often being that middle voice, in a contemporary music world where often the harmonic choices are very dictated. It feels like a very fresh approach, and for somebody whose instrument, I guess, similarly has some limitations. It's very freeing for me. I'd much prefer to be guided by linear melody and groove than I would to be kind of caged in by harmonic choices where perhaps my instrument wouldn't sing. Um, because I'm just watching the clock, there's a couple of things I want to get to, and maybe we'll come back to the composition thing, but I would hate for this hour to pass without going into Bloodlines in a deep way. Last year, you premiered a brand new festival in collaboration with the Baryshnikov Center in New York, Cat Span in Tivoli, upstate New York, not far from me, with, of course, the support of the Mellon Foundation. You gathered an incredible roster, an incredibly diverse and eclectic roster of artists who perhaps the common thread between all of us was some kind of connection to their ancestors and awareness of the migration story of their family. Um, there was a real focus on narrative, on storytelling in a patient and unhurried way that gave us, I feel, real opportunity to find intersections between our disparate cultures. It resulted in, I think, probably over 20 brand new pieces of music being premiered at the festival in June. I know this festival is happening again in 2025. Can you tell us about it, Kaoru?
Yes. And thank you for being a part of it. It was It was, I feel like, a culmination of my entire life, both professionally, musically, and personally and spiritually. Um, when Brishnikov Arts approached me about the idea of creating some sort of festival, um, I I wanted it to approach it. Um, I wanted to approach it from a different lens. There's a lot of great festivals, including what WMI does and Global Festing in New York City. But I was trying to think of a different, like, what could I bring to it that'll be different? Um, and so instead of starting the process or just having, a lot of different artists either performing by themselves or doing their own things, uh, what does it look like for them to come together? But also not just to come together, but starting off not from, exchanging musical ideas, but starting off from exchanging the stories of our parents and our grandparents and our great grandparents, and how, where they came from, what they brought with them, why they came and where they went to, um, and then how that affected the art that we are creating today, right? And so we went very quickly from, oh, mom and dad met this way back where, um, and then this conversation quickly went into like wars and slavery and genocide and education and opportunities for work, um, and the idea that each person kind of went pretty deep into their stories and brought artifacts and photographs and talked about this. People were also asking a lot of questions, but then also finding the connections and finding similarities and also the differences of their own upbringing and their own stories and their family's stories, um, and found some really remarkable through lines. Um, and then from there, the artists were all commissioned to write pieces that were inspired by the conversations that we had. I one for one example that really sticks out to me is when Du Yun was talking about her grandfather migrating from her small village in China to Shanghai, to the big city for work, and then became a coffin builder. Um, and when Du Yun was telling the story, Alicia Hall Moran, this wonderful singer, had this kind of physical reaction to that, to the word coffin, actually. And she left the room. She was kind of upset. Um, and I didn't have a chance to ask her about it, but she came back later and were improvising. And Du Yun was like really worked up. And she's like, I'm going to write a song about coffins. And Alicia had to stop her and said, I have family who were enslaved by medical institutions, um, and one of their jobs was making coffins. And so immediately Alicia said, she's like, you're my sister now. Like we're connected now through that shared narrative. And Jen Shu, another artist, was talking about in performance, she would carry her zither, this wooden long string instrument, but she would carry it on her shoulder like a coffin, thinking of her father who passed away. And so these three people from China and African American, Jen is East Timorian, Taiwanese descent. These three people coming together just around the theme of coffins, and just um, really moved by that, right, and really connected by that. That's just one example of many of these incredible stories that were kind of being.
I'd love to point out the example of Susie as well. Each of these artists, of course, had their own individual story, but the way that they chose to manifest their story was so different. Some people's scores were more through composed, some were very improv based, and gosh, how on earth I'm forgetting Susie's last name, Kaoru?
Ibarra.
Susie
Ibarra.
Ibarra, exactly. An incredible percussionist and drummer, composer, electronics artist based in Berlin. She decided to assign every artist involved a bird call, three bird calls actually. The bird that was associated with their individual migratory paths. She then created, or no, she didn't create a score. She conducted us, calling on these different birds, and we would either literally play the bird song or create an improv around it. And it was so effective and so beautiful and so graceful in the way that she gave it to us to kind of have ownership of in each of these individual performances. The whole thing was absolutely incredible. There was a lot of laughter. There was tears, regular tear. I mean, it was really, it was a powerful human experience for me, as well as being an exciting artistic endeavor. And what can people expect from 2025's iteration?
Um, we're playing around with the format a bit. Last year, as we talked about, we would gather many times during the course of half a year, and then we commissioned works, and then we had kind of a culminating event in June of yeah, this past June. Um, but we're gonna change it around. We're gonna space it out. We're gonna have, instead of one culminating event, many small events throughout the year. Um, and then the culminating event will probably happen in 26. Um, so things are still very in flux right now. We're kind of working out the details, um, who the artists are even. Everything is very open at this point. One thing that we are doing is bringing back the artists from 2025. We're planning to have more new artists for 2026, but I do want to continue the 2025 group of people as well. And so we're going to be doing, and you're going to be joining us at Winter Jazz Fest. So on January 10th, we'll be performing um, with, uh, yeah, a nice group of the Bloodlines crew. So,
At
uh,
performance space, Bryce reminded me earlier. Is that correct?
I'm sorry,
Is that performance space
performance. I forget the name. We'll put it.
on
We'll put it in
October
the.
10th? We'll put something in the chat in case anyone would like to come. And it's not going to be all of the artists involved, but it's going to be a really wonderful group of them. And if you want to experience a flavor of what the Bloodlines Festival is all about, I would highly encourage you to come to that. We're running up against the hour, Kaoru. I would love to hear some more music, and we have a few questions that I'd like to touch on as well. Could you give us a little something, and then we can jump to Q&A? And if there are any other questions out there, please write them now, and we'll be sure to get to them before the end of the session.
Shall we play?
Shall
Let's
we
play.
play?
Yeah.
So I'm going to just tell everybody I didn't come to this interview as the interviewer with my harp. I don't just bring this everywhere I go. But during sound check yesterday, um, Kaoru suggested that perhaps we might do a little something which I've never done before, um, but I would love to try.
Yeah. Okay. What key? What
Um,
tune?
Dealer's choice, artist's choice.
Uh, I have a diatonic flute, so like an A
G,
minor, G major,
okay.
E minor, E, that kind of C
We've
Lydian.
never done this before, folks. Are we just going to go in?
We're just gonna go in.
I'm ready.
Okay. I'm not sure if I.
Have fun.
I have no idea technically how that's coming across. So I could go on for another 2 hours, but I
Well,
maybe.
I'm going to go to some of the questions in the box. We've got the first question I'm seeing is, have you two collaborated on a project yet? And I mean, I have been part of the Kaoru Watanabe trio before, which was a wonderful experience. And we've collaborated a lot through Bloodlines now, and of course through our affiliation with Silkroad. And I think it's true that both of us request one another a lot on projects. And I shouldn't be talking this much, but I can explain why on my side. And I think there's this wonderful sense of personality through Kaoru's playing, or I think it's a wonderful sense of personality, but also of freedom. So I know that I can bring Kaoru into my sound world, which is very different from his sound world, but he will find a way to exist in it that brings personality, which I always want, and freedom. You know, like I can give him an idea, and he just intuitively knows how to grow that idea and have it exist in his own way that adds to whatever musical setting I'm doing. That's how I would explain it. So like in Silk Road, if I'm commissioned to write a piece, I almost always have Kaoru. And actually, in this last tour that happened, um, I had a piece called Far Down Far that Kaoru played on, and I remember at one point he was looking at the score and he said, "Hey, this part is kind of tricky on the Shinobuwe. Melodically, there's some accidentals. Should I just play it in the concert flute?" And I remember we chatted about it, and I thought about it a little bit, and I just thought, do you know, I would so much rather have the Kaoru sound that I know and have him find a way to exist in that sound world than change in any way. Like I would always put Kaoru as a musician before any score that I've written. So that's an example of a choice that I would make when Kaoru is present.
Hmm. That's exactly how I would describe you. Yeah, just being able to take anything and just build on it and create a whole symphony out of it. So yeah, I think I we did a duo during the pandemic. I don't know if you remember this. I
Did
sent you
we?
a piece. Yeah, I'll look it up and I'll put it added to the link, one of the links of that we'll send out to people after this. We did a piece of mine called "More Perfect Union."
Well, I remember the melody, but I thought we
So
played that with the trio.
so we did that. We did it online, virtually,
Oh
and
gosh.
yeah. So anyway,
And I'm sure if people come to the Bloodlines event on October 10th, we will be doing something
January.
together.
Yes.
Going on to the next question. You're both connected to Silk Road. How has that experience changed your musical journey, Kaoru?
Um. Well, I don't know if it's changed it. I mean, I feel like it was I've always kind of been on a certain trajectory of working across, you know, types of music. I mentioned we talked about me spending time in KODO, and I've been thinking about that a lot actually, very deeply as of yesterday. When I was in KODO, we had a annual world music festival, for lack of a better term, called Earth Celebration, and it started in 1981, and we've had, you know, guests from Senegal, from Mongolia, from everywhere, not everywhere, but from all over the world. Um, and one of my first experiences with that was we had Zakir Hussein come in 2001 when I was just a new member and kind of freaking out about things. And he was just this beautiful, calming presence. And then again in 2007, Earth Celebration's 20th anniversary, I was by that point I had gone from being a newbie to becoming artistic director, and so I wanted to invite Zakir back to the festival, um, and so and again he was just so gracious and warm and encouraging, uh, and yeah, and as I think most people here know, he passed away yesterday, so it's still. Uh, Hard to talk about. Um, Such a beautiful soul. Um, what were we talking about? Yeah, so I've always for the last 20 some years been working with a lot of different musicians from different parts of the world, and so joining Silkroad and um, has it just kind of fell into that stream, and yeah, has been a continuation of that journey.
Great. Sorry, I was answering questions. We are running just a couple of minutes late. I'm fine staying for a couple of minutes if you are, Kaoru. Just we'll just zip on. How might we stay informed about the festival of events? Perhaps somebody can write a website in the chat right now. Um, Someone's saying Jen. Oh, Jen Shu. I presume you mean was our last uh, World Music Institute at home guest. Your experiences of going back to connect with your roots seem to be such a big part of your paths. Have you and she talked about that?
So that was part of Bloodlines, was we talked a lot about that, and yeah, and she, as for those of you who saw hers, and I think you can see it online. Um, Again, she's from East Timor, Taiwanese descent, but she's spent many years in Japan, many months at a time in Japan, in Korea, in uh, Bali, I want to say, in various parts of the world, studying in Taiwan, studying traditional musics of different places, but not just kind of taking a couple lessons, but pretty deep dives into these. She studied biwa with a very acclaimed um, singer, biwa musician in Japan, um, and so that idea of taking these deep dives and kind of embracing different types of music and making it your own is something that I think she and then Maeve and I can always kind of relate to. She's amazing.
Yeah, in a way, Bloodlines was so fantastic because it created a family all of its own. You know, we represent to an outsider a real array of different cultures and backgrounds, but there's this com- common thread of being having one foot in the culture and another foot in new music and finding a way to exist. And we didn't even get onto this topic today of tradition versus innovation. And I know for myself, I'm sure for Kaoru and many of the artists involved in the festival, that is a constant challenge to balance and just reckon with. How can we respect and appreciate traditional music? How can we contribute towards the conservation of traditional music while still allowing it to grow and evolve? So this way of living our artistic lives we have in common, and it created an incredible bond, and it creates a bond with many people that I meet around the world. John Beachart, I hope I was pronouncing that right. John is saying, has Silk Road Ensemble performed in Japan? If so, how was it for you?
I believe they performed in Japan many years ago, but before I was a part of it. So um, I heard many stories about they struggled with the very strict recycling bin versus trash bin, and how Yo-Yo was yelled at for putting things in the wrong bin. But again, I wasn't part of that tour.
Okay.
Um,
I wonder if that will happen sometime. It'd be wonderful, wouldn't it?
yeah, it's happy recent birthday to Maeve. That's another comment.
And then we've got another one at the bottom saying, can you tell us about your experience performing recently with Andre 3000, hence the sweatshirt, and what traditional Japanese elements did you bring to the performance? That's a great question.
Um, well, every time I play, whether it's with Maeve or Andre or Silk Road or Bloodlines people, I'm always playing traditional Japanese instruments. There's always elements of it kind of embedded in there. I don't oft. I mean, actually, sometimes I might bring a piece in or a phrase. Um, but at this point, especially when I'm doing improvised music, I don't think, oh, I'm going to do a no thing. Oh, I'm going to do a Edo thing. I'm going to do this thing. It's just kind of, it's all in there at this point. Um, so in, I guess the easy answer is I was playing all traditional Japanese instruments, and then musically, what I was doing was kind of all over the place. It was like kabuki meets Eric Dolphy meets I don't know meets Andre 3000, but it was wonderful. It was really great. He's a really sweet guy. So,
Kara, this is just a nice way, I think, to wrap it all up. This idea that when you're playing, whatever the musical context,
yeah.
perhaps at this point in your life, in your career, but really just in who you are, it's not a matter of choosing, will I insert a element of Japanese traditional music here or there? It's more this lived experience is who you've become, and it's created an aesthetic perhaps that you bring with you and that affects everything you touch. So it's not necessarily Kaoru playing this instrument or this thing, it's just Kaoru being Kaoru in whatever situation he's brought into. And I think that is something that we can all aspire towards. And just I think one of the most wonderful things about you as a musician. I'm just going to say this as well. I know it's in the works. A long-awaited solo Kaoru Watanabe album is on the way, and I, for one, am so excited to hear it. Thank you so much to Bryce and Gabby. Thank you all for being here with us at the World Music Institute home sessions. Thank you, Kaoru Watanabe, for such wonderful food for thought.